Hello, my name is Andres, and today I want to talk about a wonderful collection that I read recently of these sort of bizarre psychological crime stories, and I guess borderline horror stories, and that is Japanese Tales of Mystery and Imagination by Edogawa Ranpo. This is a collection published by Tuttle, which is an excellent publisher to check out if you're interested in Japanese fiction. And this has mostly early stories by this writer, by Ranpo. That's not actually his real name. His real name is Taro Hirai, I think it was. But the pseudonym is very fitting for him, for the kind of writer that he was. It's a homage to Edgar Allan Poe, Edogawa Ranpo. And it's fitting because Ranpo is often described, I think, as a kind of father of the modern detective story in Japan. But he is also equally interested in the bizarre, the macabre, the dark, the fantastic, that kind of vibe as well. I don't know if you can say that about his whole career. I think in Ranpo's case it was more different kinds of stories at different times. Something I found, something new I learned that I found interesting in relation to this is the idea of honkaku and henkaku detective fiction in Japan, where honkaku is translated as orthodox or authentic, and henkaku is the opposite, unorthodox. And so these orthodox or authentic detective stories, the honkaku detective stories, are the kind of detective story that's an logical and intellectual form of entertainment first and foremost, where there are clues that the reader is given. There might be rules of fair play that the author might follow, so the reader can kind of follow along and try and solve the mystery alongside the detective. So that kind of thing, the puzzle type of detective story. And then henkaku detective stories they're more concerned with atmosphere and feeling, emotional impact, surprises, piled on surprises, and twists, and a general kind of, I guess, strangeness and maybe supernatural vibes at times as well. Satoru Saito, who has written a foreword to this edition, he has a book, a very new book about this called The Evolution of Classical Detective Fiction in Japan, in the Cambridge Element series, where he talks a lot about these honkaku and henkaku styles, and he says that some Japanese critics have considered henkaku to be more closely related to the quote-unquote traditionally Japanese way of thinking and seeing the world, in a very sort of, obviously culturally essentialist way, which I think is probably nonsense to some extent, but there are these two types of stories. And the reason I'm talking about this is that Ranpo kind of covered both at different times, at different points in his career. In the post-war years, he was mostly committed to writing honkaku, orthodox detective fiction, but this is a collection of stories from the 1920s, all except one, a fairly early stage in his career where Satoru Saito says that Ranpo was probably at his most experimental. And there's definitely a lot of that pre-war henkaku vibe here. There's a strong element of the fantastic and the strange and the bizarre. In this sense, the stories are part of this larger Japanese modernist, I don't know if you would call it a movement, but maybe like a modernist trend called eroguro nansensu, which means erotic, grotesque nonsense. Another new thing I learned, which, as you can probably tell from the name, is a type of art that combines the erotic with the grotesque, with the bizarre or the strange. And a lot of the stranger stories here are definitely ero and guro, I think. For example, it opens with a story called The Human Chair, which is about a carpenter who has such an inferiority complex about his appearance. He's so ugly, or he thinks he's so ugly, that he literally vanishes into the furniture. He builds this special chair, and then he lives inside it, and kind of enjoys whatever physical human contact he can get that way when people, and especially women, sit on that chair. Then in the Hell of Mirrors, you have a kind of descent into madness story about a man who is obsessed with all kinds of glasses and lenses and mirrors and optics in sexual ways and other ways as well. And then in The Caterpillar, which is an iconic work of Edogawa Ranpo, according to Satoru Saito, in The Caterpillar you have a very unsettling look into the intimate relationship and intimate lives of a woman and her quadruple amputee husband, the titular caterpillar, which is a horrible way of thinking about it. The outlier in terms of the tales of imagination, the strange tales, the outlier was what was the name again? The Traveller with the Pasted Rag picture, where you have a man traveling on a train, and there's this other guy on the carriage with him who has an oshiye picture with him. So oshiye is a type of, I guess, a type of three-dimensional art where the picture is made up of scraps of fabric, scraps of kimono silk, I think. And so the protagonist, he sees something very strange in that oshiye picture, and then he listens to the owner of that picture tell a very strange and impossible and really overtly supernatural story of that picture, of that oshiye picture. So there is a very obvious kind of interest here in the human mind and the strangeness, the possible strangeness of the human mind, especially in terms of sexuality. You can really smell the Freud and Krafft-Ebing on these stories. And this also extends to the tales of mystery as well. I mean, the distinction, the boundary between the tales of mystery and the tales of imagination here can be kind of fuzzy at times. But even the more grounded stories, which I think you can call them crime stories, but not necessarily always detective stories. Even there you have a very strong interest in the mind. They're very heavily psychologized. The reason I say they're not necessarily detective stories is because really what Ranpo focuses most of the time is just the mental state of the criminal and the kind of process of reasoning that brought him to the crime, rather than any kind of investigation. The identity of the culprit is not a mystery most of the time. It's often revealed on the first page. It's more about how he got there, what happened, how it happened. And it's mostly murderous. It's mostly murderous, pursuing this idea of the perfect, undetectable crime. For example, in the Twins, you have the confession of a man who murdered his twin brother and then usurped that brother's identity, and kind of concealing the crime in that way, so nobody realizes, at least initially, that his brother was actually dead. Or in Two Crippled Men, you have a a guy who convinces this other man that this other man is a sleepwalker, committing horrible crimes without realizing it in his sleep, and kind of makes him a scapegoat in that way. Or in The Cliff, you have somebody who, I guess, weaponizes his understanding of human psychology against people and just psychologically manipulates a woman into killing her husband. In The Red Chamber, again, you have a similar sort of thing, a man manipulating people psychologically, where he kind of identifies the deadly potential in everyday situations, really, like an old woman crossing the street and there's a tram coming, and if she just kept walking she would be fine, but he calls out to her, watch out, be careful, so she stops, she looks around, and she's hit by the tram, that kind of thing. Even in the psychological test, which is the only story here that's really like a detective story, that is really about an investigation, even here it is the detective's understanding of psychology that enables him to identify the culprit and to get the evidence he needs. So yes, very psychological stories, both the strange stories and the crime stories, very heavily psychologized. And I had a really good time with this collection, as I said. The one criticism I have is that in terms of the prose, there's not much going on here, or at least in these translations by James B. Harris. Normally when I read, I care a lot about atmosphere and how the story is written, but I think in this case I wasn't bothered too much. I think the stories, they still have a kind of murky, queasy, sort of off-putting kind of vibe to them that comes across despite the flatness of the writing. I guess it comes more from the content and the style in a way. And there's still a momentum to these stories and a kind of macabre, morbid fascination to them that made them very, very, very readable and engaging to me. So if that sounds good, if you want a collection of grotesque, bizarre, sort of crime stories, sort of horror stories, very psychological stories, then Edogawa Ranpo is a good writer to check out. Japanese tales of mystery and imagination. And if you want to learn more about this in a more academic sense, then I think Satoru Saito is a good person to check out as well. His foreword was very interesting, and I liked what I read of his book on honkaku and henkaku, detective fiction as well. He seems like a solid scholar to look into. Okay, so that's Japanese tales of mystery and imagination. That's all for now, and until next time.